The air in the grand atrium of the Ethelgerd estate was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was a suffocating perfume, one I hadn't smelled in over a decade. From my vantage point near a towering marble column, I watched my father, Richard Vance, move through the glittering crowd. He was a shark in a sea of his own making, all teeth and tailored charisma. Tonight was his magnum opus, the annual Vance Foundation Gala, a self-congratulatory spectacle designed to launder his reputation, as much as it was to raise funds for some vaguely noble cause. He was celebrating 10 years of the Ethelgerd, his crowning achievement, a resort so exclusive that its guests considered privacy to be the ultimate luxury, something they paid handsomely to maintain. I, however, wasn't on the guest list. My simple, dark silk dress was a whisper in a room of shouts, a deliberate choice. I wasn't here to blend in. I was here to be a ghost at the feast. I saw him spot me. His smile, a practiced and polished thing he reserved for investors and politicians, faltered for a microsecond. A flicker of annoyance quickly masked. He excused himself from a fawning senator and began to navigate the human currents, his path a straight, determined line toward me. The closer he came, the more the years seemed to melt away, and the familiar knot of fear and resentment tightened in my stomach. This was his arena, his kingdom, and I was the one person who knew the truth about the blood and its foundations. "Alara," he hissed, his voice a low, controlled venom that wouldn't carry to the nearby guests. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin with a possessiveness I remembered all too well. "What in God's name are you doing here? Who let you in?" His eyes, the same cold slate gray as my own, raked over my attire with disdain. "Did you really think you could just crash my event? After all this time?" The accusation hung in the air, ripe with a decade of manufactured history, his version of it, anyway. The narrative where I was the unstable, ungrateful daughter who had thrown away every opportunity he'd magnanimously given her. "I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about," I said, my voice steady. A feat of willpower that cost me more than he could ever know. 10 years. It's quite the achievement, he scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. An achievement you had nothing to do with? You are an embarrassment, Alara. Look at you. You look like you belong with the waitstaff. You are lowering the standards of this entire establishment just by breathing its air. I want you to turn around, walk out that door, and never ever come back. Do you understand me? Each word was a precisely aimed dart, designed to reopen old wounds. He was an artist of psychological warfare, and I had once been his masterpiece of suffering. But the woman standing before him tonight was not the broken girl he had cast aside. The years in the wilderness had forged something new. "Actually," I said, gently but firmly removing his hand from my arm, "I don't think I'll be leaving." A flash of fury crossed his face. "Security!" He began to call out, his voice rising. "I want this Wome." It was at that precise moment that Mr. Alistair Harrison, the resort's general manager, materialized at my side. Harrison was a man of impeccable poise. His silver hair and ramrod straight posture, the very picture of high-end hospitality. My father's face relaxed into a triumphant smirk. "Harrison, perfect timing. Escort this ... person off the premises immediately. She is trespassing." He turned his back on me, a gesture of final, dismissive contempt, already preparing to return to his adoring public. But Harrison did not move to obey. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed solely on me. The expectant silence stretched, becoming awkward. Richard turned back, a frown creasing his brow. "Harrison? Did you hear me?" Mr. Harrison cleared his throat softly. He gave a slight deferential bow, not to Richard, but to me. "Madame St. Clair," he said, his voice resonant and clear, easily audible to the few curious onlookers who had started to notice the small drama. My apologies for the disturbance. Is everything to your satisfaction this evening? Do you require me to take any action? The name St. Clair, my mother's name, the name I had resurrected myself under, hung in the air. My father's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. He looked from Harrison's respectful face to my calm one and back again. The gears were turning, grinding against a reality he could not comprehend. St. Clair? He repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. What is he talking about? Harrison, her name is Vance. She's my daughter. Now do as I say and get her out of here. I'm afraid I cannot do that. Mr. Vance, Harrison said, his tone still impeccably polite, but now underscored with a blade of steel. My fiduciary and professional duty is to the owner of this estate, and my instructions come directly from her. The silence that followed was absolute. The background chatter of the gala seemed to fade into a dull roar, the entire universe narrowing to the space between the three of us. My father's face went through a rapid, horrifying series of transformations, confusion, to dawning suspicion, to sheer, blood-draining disbelief. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. His perfectly tanned skin seemed to pale under the warm, golden light of the chandeliers. He stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time in 10 years, and seeing not the daughter he broke, but a stranger wearing her face. A stranger who held an impossible power. I let him stew in that silence, let the weight of the impossible crush him. Then I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Harrison. Thank you, Alistair. That won't be necessary. Mr. Vance is just ... leaving. I finally met my father's gaze directly. The slate gray of his eyes was now wide with shock and a burgeoning horror. I allowed myself the smallest of smiles, not of triumph, but of arrival. Hello, Dad, I said softly, letting the truth land with the force of a tectonic shift. Welcome to my resort. To understand the look on my father's face in that atrium, you have to understand the decade of silence that preceded it. You have to understand the anatomy of a perfect betrayal. It wasn't a single act, a clean cut. It was a slow, systemic poisoning, administered by the one person I was supposed to be able to trust implicitly. This part of the story, the part I'm telling you now for the record, is the part that festers. It's the wound that never fully closes. It begins not with hate, but with love, or what I mistook for it. After my mother, Eleanor St. Clair, passed away, it was just me and him. I was 22, fresh out of business school with a head full of ideas and a heart full of grief. My mother had been the buffer between us, the warmth that softened his sharp edges. Without her, all that was left was his ambition, a cold and voracious thing. My inheritance from her was substantial. She had been an astute woman, a quiet force who had built her own portfolio separate from the Vance empire. That portfolio was my birthright, and my father saw it not as my future, but as his opportunity. My graduation thesis, my passion project, was a detailed blueprint for a new kind of hospitality, a 5-star luxury resort that was also a model of environmental sustainability and ethical employment. I called it the Haven. It was my dream, every detail meticulously planned, from the solar-powered infrastructure to the profit-sharing model for staff. I poured my soul into that proposal. I presented it to my father, not as a CEO, but as a daughter seeking her father's guidance. I was so naive. I see that now. I saw the glint in his eye and mistook it for pride. This is brilliant, Ilara, he'd said, his voice thick with false sincerity. Truly visionary. Your mother would be so proud. He suggested we form a new company, a joint venture. He would bring his experience and connections. I would bring the vision and the capital, my inheritance. He called it a partnership, a legacy we would build together in Eleanor's memory. The name itself should have been a red flag, RVE Holdings, Richard Vance Enterprises. My name was nowhere to be seen. He had his lawyers, a team of impeccably dressed sharks from a top-tier firm, draw up the paperwork. They presented me with a mountain of documents, hundreds of pages filled with convoluted legalese. I remember sitting in a vast mahogany-paneled boardroom, feeling so small and out of my depth. When I hesitated, wanting my own lawyer to review it, my father placed a hand on my shoulder. "Alara, this is family. Do you really not trust me?" He framed my caution as an insult, a betrayal of our bond. That was his genius, twisting love and loyalty into weapons against you. And so I signed. I signed away my mother's legacy, my dream, and my future, all with a pen he provided. The first year was a whirlwind of excitement. We scouted locations, met with architects. It all felt real. I worked tirelessly, refining the plans, sourcing sustainable materials, convinced we were building something beautiful. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, he was meticulously dismembering my dream. He used the company as his personal piggy bank, funneling my inheritance into a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell corporations. He created fraudulent invoices, inflated construction costs, and paid non-existent consultants, all friends of his, who would then kick back a percentage to him. The haven was never meant to be built. It was a ghost project, a vehicle for the single greatest heist of his life. The end came swiftly and brutally. About 18 months in, he called a formal board meeting. The board consisted of himself, two of his cronies, and me, the powerless fourth vote. He presented a grim picture of spiraling costs and unforeseen market downturns. He declared the project unviable. He proposed dissolving RVE Holdings and liquidating its assets to cover the losses. It was all a performance, a piece of corporate theater for my benefit. I was devastated. I argued, I pleaded, I presented revised budgets and scaling options. He just looked at me with a sort of weary pity that was more insulting than any anger. "Alara, you're too emotional about this," he said, a line he had perfected over the years. "You don't have the stomach for the tough decisions business requires." The company was dissolved. My inheritance was gone, vaporized into a series of legitimate business expenses and creditor payments. I was left with nothing. But the true injustice, the part that still makes my blood run cold, was what came next. 6 months later, Vance Consolidated, his primary company, announced a major new project, the Ethelgerd Estate. It was my vision, stolen and perverted. My sustainable sanctuary twisted into an opulent monument to his own ego. He used the very same architects, the same location scouting reports. He even used a corrupted version of my tagline. Mine was luxury with a conscience. His was simply conscious luxury, a meaningless, marketable phrase. When I confronted him, he didn't even have the decency to lie well. He laughed. "Don't be ridiculous, Alara. Your little school project. This is a world-class development. You should be flattered I found some inspiration in your youthful idealism." He then launched a preemptive strike. He began telling friends, family, and business associates that I was having a breakdown, that the failure of our joint venture had unhinged me. He said I was delusional, making wild accusations, obsessed with the idea that he had stolen my idea. He painted me as unstable, incompetent, and ungrateful. He gaslighted me on a grand scale, isolating me from my support network until I had no one left to turn to. He didn't just take my money and my dream. He took my name, my credibility, my sanity. He tried to erase me. I fell into a deep depression. I was broke, humiliated, and utterly alone. I moved into a tiny apartment on the other side of the country, trying to disappear. For years, I watched from afar as the Ethelgerd estate rose from the ground, a gleaming testament to his treachery, built with the money my mother had left to secure my future. The anger was a physical thing, a constant burning fever in my chest. It was the injustice of it all. He was being lauded as a visionary, a titan of industry, while I was a ghost, a footnote in a story he had completely rewritten. That anger, that burning sense of injustice became the fuel. It was a slow-burning fire that, over many years, would forge me into the weapon that would eventually bring him down. For 2 years, I was adrift in a sea of grief and rage. I worked dead-end jobs, kept my head down, and tried to forget the name Vance. Forgetting, however, was a luxury I couldn't afford. Every magazine cover celebrating my father's vision, every society column detailing the galas at his masterpiece was a fresh twist of the knife. The turning point wasn't a dramatic bolt of lightning. It was a quiet, dusty afternoon in a second-hand bookstore. I was browsing, trying to lose myself for a few hours, when I came across a worn, leather-bound copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. It had been my mother's favorite. Tucked inside the front cover, I found a small, sealed envelope I had never seen before. Her elegant script simply said, "For Alara, when you need to remember who you are." My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a long letter. It was a short, powerful message of love and foresight. She wrote about her fears concerning my father's ambition, about her hope that I would find my own strength, independent of the Vance name. And then came the final paragraph, the words that would change everything. "I have always believed in preparing for the storm. Should you ever find yourself in a tempest not of your own making, seek out Arthur Pendleton. He is a man of true north. I have made certain provisions with him, a legacy separate from all else, a seed for a garden only you can grow. Trust him. Trust yourself, Arthur Pendleton." The name was vaguely familiar, a wisp of a memory from my childhood. He had been a close friend of my mother's in her university days, long before she met my father. A brilliant legal scholar who had, I'd heard, retired early to a quiet life somewhere on the coast. Finding him was my first mission. It took weeks of searching, but I eventually tracked him down to a small, unassuming cottage overlooking the Pacific. He was older, with a shock of white hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages. When I introduced myself as Eleanor St. Clair's daughter, his entire demeanor changed. He ushered me inside and I told him everything. I didn't hold back, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of pain and injustice. He listened patiently, his expression growing grimmer with every detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he rose, walked to a large, antique safe in the corner of his study, and spun the dial. He returned with a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "Your mother," he said, his voice filled with a profound respect, "was one of the most brilliant women I ever knew. She saw the world with a clarity that was frankly terrifying. She saw the man your father was, and she prepared for this." He opened the portfolio. Inside were the documents for a blind trust, the St. Clair Legacy Trust, established in my name the year I was born. It was an intricate, ironclad legal structure, completely firewalled from the Vance family assets. My mother had been seeding it for over 2 decades, with profits from her own shrewd, secret investments. It was designed to become accessible to me, and only me, on my 30th birthday. My father knew nothing about it. The capital it contained wasn't just substantial. It was formidable. It was a war chest. Seeing those documents, I felt something shift inside me. It was hope, but it was more than that. It was empowerment. My mother hadn't just left me money. She had left me a plan, a lifeline, a way back. Arthur became my mentor, my strategist, my rock. He saw the fire in me, the same fire he'd admired in my mother. "Vengeance is a shallow victory, Alara," he told me during one of our marathon strategy sessions. "Justice, however, is a foundation you can build a life on." We will not sink to his level. We will rise so far above it that he will be crushed by the sheer altitude. For the next 5 years, I underwent a complete transformation. I legally changed my surname to St. Clair. I shed the identity of Alara Vance, the victim. With Arthur's guidance, I immersed myself in study. I took online courses in forensic accounting, international finance, and corporate law. I learned how to read the fine print, how to follow the money, how to see the architecture of power and debt that underpins the world my father inhabited. I wasn't just a rich girl anymore. I was becoming an expert. My 30th birthday was not a celebration with cake and champagne. It was a quiet, solemn affair in Arthur's study. It was the day I came into my inheritance, the day I officially became a player. It was the day we incorporated Phoenix Holdings. The name was my own. It was a promise. We started small and smart. Guided by Arthur's wisdom and my mother's investment philosophies, I began to grow the trust capital. We invested in tech startups, green energy, and ethical ventures, everything my father despised as soft, and we were wildly successful. Phoenix Holdings grew quietly, a stealthy financial powerhouse operating in the background, its ownership structure deliberately opaque. I lived modestly, never betraying the wealth I now commanded. I drove a simple car, lived in a comfortable but unassuming apartment. I became a ghost in the financial world, a name on paper, a force no one could connect to the disgraced daughter of Richard Vance. The child from the prompt wasn't a person. It was my company. Phoenix Holdings was born from the ashes of my old life. It was my hope, my empowerment, my path back to the world that had cast me out. And with it, I was finally ready to stop hiding. I was ready to start hunting. The plan to reclaim my legacy was not a frontal assault. It was a siege, patient and suffocating. My father's world was built on debt and perception. I intended to dismantle both, brick by brick, until his entire empire imploded. Arthur and I codenamed it Operation Bedrock, because our goal was to expose the fraudulent ground on which his kingdom was built. Phase 1 was the acquisition of debt. My father, in his arrogance, had financed the Ethelgard estate's expansion with a complex web of high interest, loans from various international creditors. He saw debt as a tool, a way to leverage other people's money for his own glory. I saw it as a leash. Through a series of shell corporations established by Phoenix Holdings, each with a bland, forgettable name like Mid-Atlantic Capital Ventures or Pacific Rim Asset Management, I began buying that debt. It was a delicate, high-stakes game. We had to move slowly, acquiring small percentages from different creditors so as not to raise any alarms. Each transaction was a quiet victory, a tightening of the invisible chain around his neck. Within 3 years, Phoenix Holdings, under its various pseudonyms, became the primary, albeit silent, lien holder for the Ethelgard estate. My father went to bed every night sleeping in a palace he effectively owed to me. He had no idea. The tension during this phase was immense. We operated through proxies and cutouts, our communications encrypted. A single misstep, a single link back to me, and the entire strategy would crumble. I lived in a state of constant, controlled paranoia. Phase 2 was infiltration. Owning the debt wasn't enough. I needed irrefutable proof of his ongoing crimes, proof that would stand up in a court of law and the court of public opinion. I needed someone on the inside. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. We spent a year vetting candidates before we found Lena Petrova. Lena was a brilliant forensic accountant in her late 30s, working in the Ethelgard's finance department. She was quiet, overlooked, and deeply principled. Through our research, we discovered that her family had lost their life savings years ago due to a fraudulent real estate scheme run by a subsidiary of Vance Consolidated. She harbored a quiet, simmering resentment for my father and the system that protected men like him. Arthur made the approach through a trusted third party, a legal headhunter. We offered her a position as the CFO of a new, exciting tech firm, a legitimate company under the Phoenix umbrella, with a salary triple what she was making. But there was a condition. For the next 6 months, she would remain at Ethelgerd and serve as our eyes and ears. We were honest about our objective, to expose Richard Vance's corruption. For Lena, it wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance at justice. She agreed. Lena became our lifeline. She communicated with us through a dead man switch on a secure, encrypted server. She began feeding us a steady stream of information, duplicate ledgers, internal audits that had been buried, evidence of my father skimming profits, and details of his tax evasion schemes. He was using the resort's charitable foundation, the very one being celebrated at the gala, as a personal slush fund to finance his extravagant lifestyle. Every document she sent was another nail for his coffin. The stress was palpable. There were several close calls. Once, my father ordered a surprise internal audit, and Lena had to work for 48 hours straight, covering her tracks and doctoring the digital trails to hide the data she had copied. I remember being on a secure video call with Arthur, neither of us sleeping, just watching a progress bar as she exfiltrated the final, damning piece of evidence, my heart pounding with every percentage point. Phase 3 was the squeeze. With the evidence secured and the majority of the debt in my hands, it was time to apply pressure. I started by anonymously calling in a small portion of the loans. It was a pinprick, but it was enough to spook his other investors. Then, through a financial blog that Phoenix secretly funded, we leaked a carefully worded, anonymous tip about potential financial instability at Mance Consolidated. The market reacted. His stock dipped. His credit lines tightened. My father, who had always operated with an infinite sense of financial security, suddenly found himself constrained. He grew irritable, paranoid, lashing out at his staff. Lena reported that he was becoming increasingly reckless, moving money around frantically to cover the shortfalls, creating an even messier, more obvious trail of fraudulent activity. He was a drowning man, and we were the invisible tide pulling him under. The final move was a masterpiece of corporate theater that Arthur designed. We created a fictional rival, a Hong Kong-based hospitality conglomerate called Dragonspire Holdings. We made them aggressive, flashy, and utterly ruthless, the perfect embodiment of my father's worst fears. Dragonspire initiated a hostile takeover bid for Vance Consolidated, driving the stock price down further. Panicked, my father began looking for a white knight investor to save him. And that's when we made our move. An unassuming acquisitions firm, another Phoenix subsidiary, approached him with an offer. Not for the parent company, but for its crown jewel, the Ethelgerd estate. The offer was just high enough to allow him to pay off his massive debts and save his parent company from the Dragonspire takeover. But it would leave him with almost nothing. He would be forced to sell his life's work. It was a humiliating choice, but his only one. He fought it for weeks, but with the creditors, me, closing in, and the fictional Dragonspire breathing down his neck, he had no choice. He accepted the offer. He negotiated one final condition into the sale, that he be allowed to host his 10th anniversary gala at the resort. A final night as king of the castle, a chance to spin the narrative, to announce his strategic pivot to his friends and investors. I granted his request. It was the perfect stage for the final act. The night of the gala, as I walked through those doors, I wasn't just a daughter returning home. I was a creditor, an investigator, and as of 5 p.m. that evening when the sale officially closed, the resort's new silent owner. The trap was set. All that was left was for the wolf to walk into it. The moment stretched, thin and brittle, in the opulent atrium. The revelation hung between us, a guillotine blade suspended by a thread. My father's face, a canvas of shock and dawning horror, was reflected in the polished marble floor. The whispers around us began to swell, a rising tide of scandal among the city's elite. He finally found his voice, a ragged, strangled sound. "You're lying. This is a trick. A pathetic, desperate stunt." I didn't respond to him. Instead, I gave a subtle signal to the event coordinator, one of my people who had replaced my father's staff that morning. A wireless microphone was discreetly placed into my hand. I tapped it lightly, and the soft sound echoed through the atrium's state-of-the-art sound system, silencing the crowd. The string quartet faltered into silence. Every eye in the room was now on us. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice calm and clear, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I apologize for the interruption. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alara St. Clair. My father, Richard Vance, was just expressing his ... surprise at my presence here tonight. He seems to be under the impression that this is still his event." I paused, letting the implication sink in. As of 5 o'clock this afternoon, the sale of the Ethelgerd estate was finalized. "I am the new owner." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. My father's face contorted with rage. "She's insane. She's penniless. Security, get her off the stage." But his power here had evaporated. The security guards, now my employees, remained motionless, their eyes fixed on Mr. Harrison, who stood impassively at my side. "You're right about one thing, Dad," I continued, my gaze locking onto his. "You did leave me penniless. You left me with nothing but a dream you stole. A dream many of you tonight have enjoyed as the Ethelgerd estate. The large screens around the room, which have been cycling through glossy photos of my father shaking hands with celebrities and politicians, suddenly flickered. The tribute video was not going to play. In its place, a simple document appeared, magnified for all to see, the incorporation papers for RVE Holdings, clearly showing my name as a founding partner and the initial capital investment, the exact amount of my inheritance. "This is where it began," I narrated, my voice echoing with a cold, documentary precision. "A partnership. A father-daughter venture. A lie." The screen changed. A complex flowchart appeared, meticulously designed by Lena. It showed the flow of money from RVE Holdings into a web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and finally, into the primary development fund for the Ethelgerd estate. It was a damning, undeniable map of his grand larceny. "He told me the project failed," I said, my voice ringing with the clarity of truth. "He told me my inheritance was lost to bad investments. But it wasn't lost. It was laundered. It became the foundation for this very building." My father lunged toward the stage, his face purple with fury. "Turn it off. Turn it off now." But he was intercepted by two calm but immovable security guards. He was a king with no soldiers left. He was just a man trapped in the wreckage of his own lies. Lena Petrova, my inside source, stepped forward from the side of the stage. "I am Lena Petrova," she said to a second microphone. "For the last 80 months, I have been a senior accountant at Ethelgerd. I can personally attest to the authenticity of these documents. And there's more." The screen shifted again, now displaying my father's personal bank statements, cross-reference with fraudulent invoices and illegal transfers from the Vance Foundation, the very charity they were all there to support. The guests began to murmur, the shock turning to disgust. They weren't just witnessing a family drama. They were witnessing the exposure of a man who had likely conned many of them as well. They were watching one of their own being unmasked as a common thief. At that moment, the grand doors to the atrium swung open. But it wasn't more guests arriving. It was Arthur Pendleton, looking every bit the elder statesman of law, flanked by two stern-faced individuals in dark suits. I recognized them from our meetings, Detectives Miller and Chun from the SFPD's Economic Crimes Unit. The final piece of the plan fell into place. The room fell into a dead, tomb-like silence. Arthur walked calmly to the stage, carrying a leather briefcase. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at my father, who now stood between the guards, utterly defeated, the fight draining out of him as he saw the faces of the detectives. Richard Vance, Detective Miller's voice was devoid of emotion. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and money laundering. The click of the handcuffs snapping onto my father's wrists was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a decade of injustice finally being answered. It was the sound of chains breaking, not just for him, but for me. He was escorted out, not even looking at me, his face a gray, vacant mask of utter ruin. He walked past the senator he had been charming, past the investors he had been courting, past the world he had built, a prisoner in his own palace. The catharsis was not a fiery explosion of triumph. It was a quiet, deep, shuddering release. A wave of relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees. I stood on that stage, looking out at the wreckage, at the stunned faces of the crowd, and I felt the weight of the past 10 years lift from my shoulders. The ghost of Alara Vance was finally at peace. Alara St. Clair was just getting started. 6 months have passed since that night. The trial was swift. The evidence Lena and I had compiled was so overwhelming that my father's high-priced lawyers could do little more than negotiate a plea bargain. He was convicted on multiple counts and is now serving a sentence in a federal correctional facility. The Vance empire, built on a foundation of lies, crumbled into dust. The Ethelgerd estate, however, is being reborn. I'm speaking to you now from my office, a space that was once my father's. I've had it completely redesigned. The dark, imposing mahogany has been replaced with light, reclaimed wood and glass. The walls are no longer adorned with portraits of his own face, but with blueprints and plans for the future. The view from the window, overlooking the pristine coastline, is the same, but I see it with different eyes. I see not a conquest, but a responsibility. The healing process is not linear. There are days when the anger and the grief of his betrayal resurface, sharp and unexpected. Undoing the psychological damage inflicted by a parent is a lifelong endeavor. But for the first time, I feel like I am in control of my own narrative. I am no longer defined by his actions, but by my own. My first act as owner was not to purge, but to reform. I called an all-staff meeting in the very atrium where my father was arrested. I laid out my vision, the original vision for the Haven. I announced a new profit-sharing model, significant wage increases for all non-managerial staff, and the establishment of a fully funded employee wellness and education program. Mr. Harrison, who I promoted to Chief Operating Officer, is helping me implement these changes. We are investing heavily in sustainability, transitioning the entire resort to renewable energy and locally sourced organic food. We are building the place I dreamed of all those years ago, a sanctuary built on principles of respect for our employees, for our community, and for our planet. The biggest change, however, is the establishment of the St. Clair Phoenix Foundation. Funded with 20% of the resort's annual profits, its mission is twofold. First, it provides pro bono legal and financial expertise to victims of financial abuse and corporate fraud. People like the younger version of myself who find themselves trapped and alone against powerful adversaries. Arthur Pendleton, now fully retired from practicing law, sits as the chairman of the board, offering his wisdom and guidance. Lena Petrova is its executive director, using her incredible skills to help others untangle the complex webs of deceit, that nearly destroyed her own life. Second, the foundation invests in and mentors young entrepreneurs, particularly women who have brilliant ethical business ideas but lack the capital and connections to bring them to life. We provide the seed money that was stolen from me, ensuring that their dreams aren't extinguished by the greed of others. My life is quiet now, but it is full. My new family is the one I have built. Arthur, Lena, Mr. Harrison, the dedicated staff of this resort. We are a community bound not by blood, but by a shared purpose. I don't know if I will ever fully forgive my father. Forgiveness is a complex terrain, and I am still navigating my way through the wilderness of my past. But I have found something more valuable than forgiveness: peace. I have taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and transformed it into a source of strength and a force for good. Sometimes I walk the grounds at dawn, just as the sun begins to rise over the ocean, casting a golden glow over everything. I think about the name of my company, Phoenix Holdings, the mythical bird that rises from its own ashes, reborn and more powerful than before. It's a fitting metaphor. My father's final, venomous words to me that night were that I would lower the standards. He was wrong. I didn't just meet the standards. I am redefining them. This place is no longer a monument to one man's ego. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It is proof that from the deepest ashes of betrayal, it is possible to rise, to rebuild, and to create something beautiful. Something that lasts.